Every week, Hillsdale College President Larry Arnn joins Hugh Hewitt to discuss great books, great men, and great ideas. This is Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio.
Morning glory and evening grace, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Welcome to the last radio and television hour of the week. It is the Hillsdale Dialogue. Each and every Friday I sit down with Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College, and we are normally about either current events or some great work by some great author. But for the next many months, we're going to be in this set of books, which is Winston Churchill's 6-volume history of the Second World War. And I indeed did not drop Volume 1. I've just been reading Volume 1, so I'll turn that around. Dr. Arnn, how fares you today? How goes it?
Good. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Now, I'm hopeful.
Turning toward school starting.
You don't start school until when?
Well, a man's work is never done. They begin to come back in 2 weeks.
Oh, dear.
Which is too soon, but we're kind of ready for it.
All right. Well, we're going to get a lot of this done during the school year, some of it done during the summer. And what by it I mean is Dr. Arnn's commentary on these 6 volumes, which is a magisterial history of World War II by Winston Churchill. It's 6 volumes. It was published originally between 1948, remember the war ends in 1945, and 1954. He used his, quote, second wilderness to write it. And I'm about to give a quick rundown of his career, Dr. Arnn, but you actually, it would be helpful if you would explain your connection to Churchill and the Churchill official biography and why you are the equal of any authority of Churchill running around on this planet today, since Sir Martin Gilbert has gone to his reward and the great man died in 1965. What's your connection to all this?
Well, it starts in 1975. I was bitten by a dog, and I was house sitting for somebody. It's actually true. I have a little scar right here. Probably can't see it. But the guy I was house sitting for had written his doctoral thesis on Churchill, and all the books were there, and I was bedridden for several days. And I started reading The World Crisis, and I have never stopped reading Churchill since then. I got a Rotary Fellowship, supposed to get a year in England, ended up with 3. And Professor Jaffa, my teacher, had given a little money through a foundation he was involved with to Martin Gilbert. And Martin Gilbert was the Churchill biographer. And so I met him in 1977, and we got on. He thought I was coming to ask him for help. I was too ignorant to know if I needed any help. And so I offered him help. And at that time, he controlled access to the Churchill archive, which were in the bottom floor of the Bodleian Library, new library. It has 3 big buildings, the Bodleian Main Library of Oxford. So down in the basement, and it was Winston Churchill's filing cabinets, the ones that he used, about which he wrote a memo. And all his papers were in there, a lot of them, huge thing. And so because I offered to help Martin Gilbert and didn't ask him for help, those things were probably equally important, he said, "Would you like a job?" And I said, "Sure." And so I went to work for him. I don't believe that I ever had a conversation about money with Martin Gilbert until decades later he asked me for a job here, and I paid him. Anyway, so here am I working on this great biography. I do not have a degree in history, but this is what I regard as the greatest historian of the 20th century. And he was a very serious man. Everything was documentary. Everything was in chronological order. Everything needed to be proved from ample sources. And he wrote 85 big books of history. It was very important that 2 weeks after I went to work for him, he hired a new assistant to organize documents and stuff downstairs. And that woman is now my wife of 45 years. And so these were very pregnant times, although literally that would take some years before that happened. And so I'm working for this guy, and I learn how to do archival and historical research. And I learned something I'd already learned in graduate school, studying political philosophy. Look it up. Find out. And so, because there's joy in that, and because he was such a great man, and I ended up being associated with him until he died in 2015. And then here at the college, the official biography of Churchill is the longest biography ever written. It's 8 big volumes of narrative. The first 2.5 were written by Randolph Churchill, Churchill's son, and the last 5.5 were written by Martin Gilbert and finished before he died. And I helped him with several of those. But then there are these document volumes, and there are 23 of them that reproduce basically everything that is of interest in the life of Churchill, from Churchill's archive and from many others. And those are big, fat books. There are 31 total volumes. The average document volume has 4,000 footnotes in it. And it's in chronological order, and you can read through everything that came to the notice of Winston Churchill from him or to him, and most things significant said about him at the time in chronological order. So it's a wonderful resource.
So what I like the audience to understand at the beginning of this podcast series is that there was Sir Winston Churchill, and Churchill lived from 1874, his birthday is November 30th, until early in the year, January 24 of 1965. And he wrote some 42 books with 70-odd volumes in them. And in the course of that, not long after World War II was over, in which he saved the West, he wrote these 6 volumes. And he had access to the confidential files, which we'll get to. After his life was lived, an official biography was begun by his son, Randolph Churchill, which Randolph Churchill transferred to Martin Gilbert, which you helped Martin Gilbert on. And then when Martin Gilbert had gone from the field, you and your colleagues at Hillsdale College continued with the Churchill papers and the Gilbert papers at Hillsdale College. So that's the lineage. This is the provenance, I believe it's called, of Churchilliana. Now, I personally believe the 2 best single-volume biographies of Winston Churchill are the single volume by Martin Gilbert and Lord Andrew Roberts' recent book about Winston Churchill, Walking with Destiny. But you are also the author of a book yourself about Churchill, Churchill's Trial. What is that about?
That's me actually doing what I set out to do when I met Martin Gilbert, which was explain, as in general, what Churchill was up to in his life. What did he set out to do? I believe that was a long-term purpose that altered very little, although his career was full of the most amazing surprises and tragedies and victories, and it's one of the most consequential lives anybody ever lived, and one of the best recorded lives. I don't know of anybody who wrote so much about statesmanship who was a statesman as Churchill. And I don't know anybody who wrote better about it, in my opinion, than Cicero and Thucydides, and I regard those as close. So, yeah, it's a tremendous opportunity to learn something about practical wisdom. And that's why I adopted it. First of all, if you read we did read it on the show, the first paragraph of The World Crisis. It was the custom in the palmy days of Queen Victoria for statesmen to expatiate upon the former glories of the British Empire. 3 times they had come forward, I paraphrase now, to save the world. Little did they know that the best was still to come.
And that was about World War I, correct?
That's right.
That's the world crisis.
Anyway, I fell in love with that, and I thought this is one of the richest sources of how to understand practical wisdom, which has to do with making choices in light of circumstances and eternal conditions. And Aristotle says you can learn that best by people who have the reputation for being good at it. Then he names Pericles, a statesman from the Greeks. And I thought I could learn a lot from this. And my life is, divided between studying and teaching and doing. And so I've found it infinitely valuable to know a lot about Winston Churchill. Whether it makes me any better or not, it's extremely satisfying. And,
but we are caught in an undertow right now of bad Churchill history. So it is both serendipitous and necessary that we turn specifically to these 6 volumes. We've been talking a lot about Churchill for the last 3 years, and I'll explain why and why we're going into these 6 volumes immediately after the break and give you a little brief bio of Churchill in which to hang your hat in the event you're a new listener coming to this podcast series. Apart from all the other Hillsdale Dialogues, but do remember all things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu.
This show is a part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to your favorite. You'll get brand new episodes of all your favorite shows sent right to your device, and you'll help us know that you're out there listening. Never miss another episode by going to podcast.hillsdale.edu/subscribe. That's podcast.hillsdale.edu/subscribe. Or click the follow or subscribe button on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Dr. Arnn, before we go again to the biography, I do want to add a fun little note. There are many films and miniseries about Winston Churchill. My favorite is Finest Hour, starring Gary Oldman as Churchill. I believe that's your favorite as well, and I believe you had something to do with it as well, or at least visited the set. What was the backstory there?
Well, I know Gary Oldman and like him a lot, and I know his producer, Doug Urbanski, they're very close colleagues. If you see a Gary Oldman movie, you'll see among the producers Doug Urbanski. And he's a L.A. guy, and he's a wonderful man. And I know them well. And so I went and visited the set while they were making the movie. I watched a preview of it in New York and talked to the brass at Focus Features about whether I thought the movie was true or not. And what I told them was, it's beautiful. It's fundamentally true. And there are some boners in it, but they're not wicked, except one of them. So that was my account of it. And then Gary Oldman came to Hillsdale, and we got to show the film with him and Urbanski and a vice president for marketing from Focus Features there. We had a huge crowd at Hillsdale, and we showed that movie, and then Gary and Urbanski talked about it afterwards. So, yeah, I liked the movie a lot. And I think it captures the spirit of it. And
so if you want to get into this podcast and you need another little prod, go sit down in front of your streaming service, call up Finest Hour, watch that, and then you'll know just a glimpse of what we're doing with these 6 volumes. Now the brief bio, Dr. Arnn. Winston Churchill is the son of Lord Randolph Churchill and Jenny Jerome Churchill. Jenny Jerome is an American from a New York financier. She is half and half. Lord Winston Churchill went to Harrow and then to Sandhurst. Can you give us a quick word on both Harrow and Sandhurst, Dr. Arnn?
Harrow is one of the 2 great public schools, which means private school in England. Eton is the other. Churchill went there. He had a good record, but not stellar. He was a good student sometimes when he wanted to be. Very good sometimes when he wanted to be. Then he got out, and his father and he had a very troubled relationship. He crammed and took the military exam and didn't do great on it. His father wanted him to go into the infantry because that was cheaper, but he got admitted to the cavalry, which Churchill adored, and went to Sandhurst, a military academy for young officers, training for young officers. And they studied tactics and strategy and engineering and riding horses and whacking things with the saber.
And as a boy, he had tin soldiers, right? He was a collector of tin soldiers.
Oh, yeah. He once impressed his father. He had an amazing collection of them. One of my favorite professors not long ago gave me a set like Churchill's set. Huh. And And they're very well, and not, I've got 15 of them. They're the 21st Lancers, in which Churchill was in the Sudan. And he had, 100 or more. And he was very good at laying out battles and, figuring out the terrain. He's a little boy. His father was once impressed with him, his ability to do that. He didn't impress his father as much as he might have if his father had lived on. So, yeah, he was a handful as a little boy. He was an excellent fencer, won a championship at Harrow. He, as a rule, he claimed that he could not learn Latin or Greek. In fact, he passed both those subjects and did reasonably well. We have his report cards. Churchill is pretty good at something, by the way. There'll be instances in this history that we're reading where he did something really amazing. Like when we read My Early Life and he talks about the armored train. Yes. But he doesn't make such a deal out of it. And so maybe we can fill in some details about that. But yeah, as a young man, he was one of those young men. We have them around here. I like this particular kind very much myself. They're always up to something. And what Churchill was up to was not mastery of great books until later. And then he was out of school by then.
When he got out of school, he was a soldier, but he also chose to be a war correspondent. And if you've listened to Dr. Arnn and I do previous installments in the books of Churchill, you will know that he first, after he graduated from Sandhurst, was a war correspondent and was engaged in combat in Cuba, then deployed to India as a second lieutenant on the Afghan frontier. Then he was a cavalry officer and a war correspondent in the Sudan expedition. We read the River War against the forces of the late Mahdi. He was a war correspondent, but became an officer in the Second Boer War. And again, in World War I, his military units were the 4th Queen Hussars, the 21st Lancers, the South African Light, the Horse Queen's Own Oxfordshire Hussars, the Grenadier Guards, and the Royal Scots Fusiliers. That was all done in his first 26 years. He was elected a Conservative Member of Parliament in the year 1900. He crossed the line in 1904 to become a Liberal. At this point, we need to pause, Dr. Arnn. Again, for people who are just listening to this podcast alone, they haven't listened to our previous podcast, we got to tell them about the Liberals, Labor, and the Conservatives, the three great parties that will dominate this drama and all of Churchill's life. He first was a Conservative, then was a Liberal, and he teamed up with the great Labor leader, Lloyd George. What are those three parties roughly?
Go back a bit further. In the earlier British history, 17th, 18th century, the Tories or Conservatives are up against the Whigs. The Whigs disappeared in the 19th century and they were replaced by the Liberals. The Whigs, by the way, we had American Whigs. Abraham Lincoln was a Whig for a while. I can go into what that means, but it's the origins of the term are somewhat obscure.
Yes, I think that would be helpful.
Well, if I remember right, it has to do with the broom. The Whigs were reformers. Everybody was a monarchist back then, and everybody was a constitutional monarchist. Because the Whigs are a big force in the, in reform prior to the English Civil War. They cut off the head of Charles I, and then that's what year is that? That's
the 1650, 1641, maybe.
Yeah, something like that. And then in 1688, there's the Glorious Revolution.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back, America, with the Glorious Revolution. All of this preparatory to World War II and the official Churchill's account of World War II. Stay tuned to the Hillsdale Dialogue.
Hello, this is Jeremiah Regan, and I have some great news. We've brought Hillsdale's incredibly popular free online courses to the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. The Hillsdale College Online Courses podcast brings you our online courses in their entirety, with courses ranging from ancient history and biblical epics to foundational political principles and the future of American citizenship. Follow the Hillsdale College Online Courses podcast to hear new episodes every week with additional commentary and insights from our team. Go to podcast.hillsdale.edu to learn more. That's podcast.hillsdale.edu.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. This is the first installment in a long series on Winston Churchill's 6-volume history of World War II. Dr. Arnn and I are setting up the political parties that are engaged in the grand coalition of those who defeated the Nazis and the Japanese Imperial Empire, which goes back to the English Civil War, 1688. Dr. Arnn, in 5 minutes, you got to get us up to 1901.
Whig Party disappears. Liberals take their place. It's the Liberals and the Conservatives are Tories. Churchill's father was a figure among the Tories, a fighter against and with and for sometimes the great William Gladstone, the greatest liberal figure. Joe Chamberlain, Neville Chamberlain's father, left the Liberals and joined the Tories and broke Irish Home Rule. So now we go into the 20th century, and the Labour Party, a socialist party, is formed, and Churchill thinks that's death. And he was an avid anti-socialist. And so the story of the 20th century is the story of the Labour Party gaining strength. They formed a minority government for the first time in 1929. They won a big majority in the aftermath of the Second World War against Churchill and formed the first majority government in 1945. After the First World War, and this is sort of when our story starts in this Second World War history, the big figure is a man named Stanley Baldwin. We were corresponding this morning. Who's Stanley Baldwin like? The names I could come up with are Mitch McConnell and Bob Dole.
Made sense
Because
to
you
me.
have to remember,
Yeah,
the executive branch is part of the legislative branch in Britain because of historical accidents. And so the guy running the cabinet is not running it the same way the president does. The president can fire him. The cabinet is picked by people who can help the guy put a majority together. And so it's a big step to fire one of them. You might lose your control. And so he doesn't have complete control of the ministries. And you're sort of herding cats a little bit like a congressional senatorial leader might be in America. And Stanley Baldwin was very clever at that, very clever. And I like to say Winston Churchill never had a direct controversy with Stanley Baldwin that Stanley Baldwin didn't come out on top. And they got along well, a lot, through a long career. In his first conservative administration in 1924, when they won a big majority, Baldwin gave Churchill the second position in the cabinet. Partly that was because Churchill, like his father before him, had, like Joseph Chamberlain before him, Churchill had spent some time in the Liberal Party. He began a conservative, he crossed to the Tories over free trade, and then he came back when the Liberal Party made its first pact with the Labour Party, and he would not serve with them. And so he brought votes to the Conservatives, and he got the second place in the cabinet called Chancellor of the Exchequer, which is a bigger thing than our Secretary of the Treasury with those responsibilities and more. And
they also got to live next door to each other. The Prime Minister lives at number 10 Downing Street. The Chancellor of the Exchequer lives at number 11.
And they got on like a house of fire through a 5-year administration. It was commonly said back then that no chancellor had ever presented 5 consecutive budgets, which happens once a year, to the parliament without becoming prime minister. And so for years, because Churchill went into the wilderness in the 30s, for years it was said Churchill would break that mold. But I think it's true to this day that no chancellor ever presented 5 budgets without becoming prime minister.
Now, let me also say that at the time, the one thing I want to get into this segment, he went into Parliament in 1900 as a conservative. The socialists aren't around yet. He crossed the line to become a liberal in 1904. Over what issue, Dr. Arnn? Kind of resonates with today.
Tariffs. Churchill was a free trader, and he compromised that later in his life. But you have to understand that issue, because in Britain it's a different kind of issue than in America, because what the tariffs were in Britain was taxes on importations of food, and food was grown by landowners, and the landowners were the landed aristocracy, and they had, until the turn of the 20th century, outsized control by birth over Parliament.
Over the wealth. And that's why when Churchill crossed the line in 1904, people would never forgive him for it, really never forgive him for it. It made him controversial from the start of his parliamentary career. We come back, we'll talk about that parliamentary career right up to World War II. Don't go anywhere. I'm Hugh Hewitt, all things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. Welcome back, America. This is the first segment of a long series on Winston Churchill's history of the Second World War. To get to the history, we have to go through Churchill and outline. We've done it a lot, but this is the brief introduction. He was elected in 1900. He crossed the line in 1904, and he served for 15 years as a cabinet officer, as the president of the Board of Trade in the Liberal government, as the Home Secretary, which is a big deal in the Liberal government. He served as the First Lord of the Admiralty during the First World War. The Gallipoli campaign, for reasons we covered in the First World War series, took him out for a while. He was briefly the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. He resigned, went to the Western Front, fought with the Royal Scots Fusiliers, a lieutenant colonel. David Lloyd George brought him back into the coalition government. David Lloyd George is a Labourite. And he served as Minister of Munitions, Secretary of State for War, Secretary of State for Air, Secretary of State for the Colonies. He oversaw the Anglo-Irish Treaty and British foreign policy in the Middle East. And after 2 years out of Parliament, when there was this hung sort of Parliament, he was made, as Dr. Arnn was just saying, Chancellor of the Exchequer in Stanley Baldwin's Conservative government. But he had a falling out with Churchill. And what was that over, Dr. Arnn? He had a falling out with Baldwin.
Yeah, he did, and with many conservatives, and it's in order 3 steps. It was a 3-step process. I think it was in April of 1929 that the election was held, and the Tories lost. The Labour and the Socialists come in narrow, and the first thing that happened was the Tories joined with the new government to make concessions in Egypt that Churchill thought unwise, and he quarreled with them about that. And then they started making a plan for ultimate dominion status in India, and Churchill thought that was premature. And he fought them tooth and nail about that. And of course, they got it through. And, whether Churchill was right or wrong about that, it's worth mentioning that he always thought that the Indians had the eventual right to govern themselves. But if the British let them have that now, there'd be a bloodbath, which eventually, by the way, there was.
What I learned, by the way, in this first volume, I did not know, later to be known as Lord Halifax, I believe this is true, correct me if I'm wrong, was the Viceroy of India when Baldwin and Churchill were fighting about India. And Halifax would come on with Neville Chamberlain, who's also in that government, later to become the appeasers. Churchill was not in that government of appeasement. We will make that clear by the end of this show. But it broke the friendship or the partnership between Baldwin and Churchill went into the wilderness over India. What else, if anything else?
Well, then Hitler. Hitler comes into power in January 1933, and the official policy of Britain at that time, and for a time afterwards, was to seek disarmament. Meanwhile, Hitler is building weapons. And he just took Germany by the throat and chucked it till it did everything he said. And the story of that, by the way, is a tremendous story that's worth reading. There's some really great biographies of Hitler. The best in English is by Ian Kershaw, a really great one written in 1945. It's short, but it's very insightful, and it's by Alan Bullock. Hitler, A Study in Tyranny. Kershaw's is much more thorough and much bigger, and uses many more German sources. And he's a tremendous historian, and his is 3 volumes long.
It is interesting in these books, the first reference to Hitler is to Corporal Hitler. I'm sure that is not an accident.
No. Well, he used to call him, I don't know where this comes from exactly, but in the Parliament, he used to call him Little Corporal Schickelgruber. Once he was at war with him, he really poured contempt on him. And after Britain had survived the Battle of Britain, the air war that broke out in 1940, and was still alive and kicking sometime in 1941, Churchill quotes Little Corporal Schickelgruber saying, "We're going across the channel and wring their neck like a chicken." And Churchill says, "Some chicken, some neck."
Next week in the first segment, we're going to pick up from 1919, but I want the audience to follow in their ears and in their minds, or if they're watching on the show or listening over at hillsdale.edu. From 1914 to 1929, Churchill is a major figure in British politics. Even from before that, really from 1904 until 1929, he's a major figure in British politics. He's out of government for less than 2 years, and by out of government, I mean out of major office. He held all the offices of state except prime minister, and he had done everything he could possibly do, but he was banished from the Conservative Party, driven out, is it fair to say, by Stanley Baldwin purposefully? That's what Lord Andrew Roberts thinks.
Oh, yeah. And they tried, Stanley Baldwin was very clever, and he was not a bad man. He was just wrong and skillful, and he in the end, one of the differences is Churchill had a higher opinion of the British people than Baldwin did, in my opinion. He thought,
and one of the things I want to underscore, and one of the reasons we're doing this series, because of the terrible Churchill revisionism underway on the fringes by people like Darryl Cooper and others going on today, they get their history so mixed up, they do not realize that throughout the rise of the Nazis and Hitler from 1933 forward until they had made war upon Poland, Winston Churchill was not the prime minister, and indeed he did not become the prime minister until the Battle of France had effectively destroyed France. So they're just all wrong about who caused World War II and Churchill's role. They're just all wrong, Dr. Arnn. So we're going to conclude this first program by saying you got to listen next week to figure out what was so bad about the period 1919 to 1939, those 20 years of doom that led to the disaster of World War II and to the greatness of Winston Churchill. But Dr. Arnn, is that what annoys you the most about the revisionism? They just don't know anything?
Well, the simple facts are wrong, but the great weight and direction but the fear is wrong, too.
All right, we will be back. We will be back with a short bit after this. Stay tuned. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Dr. Arnn and I will make sure you know of the website where all of these particular podcasts are included for the Second World War. But I haven't been paying attention in the segment, and I want to make sure every week you hear 3 things. 1, Imprimis, 2, the video courses, and 3, the classical schools that Hillsdale is sponsoring. I got my friends so excited up in Anchorage, Alaska, they're starting one. But first, Imprimis. How many people receive Imprimis a month now, Dr. Arnn?
6.7 million, I think, is the number.
So you ought to be reading what 6.7 million people read. Go to hillsdale.edu, sign up for it. It's free. It's a speech digest. The words of those who arrive on campus in Hillsdale and speak at great length about important subjects. Secondly, there are video courses. How many of them are there, Dr. Arnn?
Over 40 now.
Wow. My favorite is the totalitarian novels, but there's always a new one. Those are all available at hillsdale.edu. And then finally, they are in the school business. And how do people find out about the schools, Dr. Arnn?
Go to hillsdale.edu and make yourself into a great person and apply. And if you're tough enough and smart enough and determined enough, come to college here. It's a big problem, but you'll prosper and grow.
Oh, I wasn't talking about the college. I always tell people about the college throughout the week. I'm talking about your K through 12 schools.
Oh. So there's close to 100, I don't know how many there are of those. And we've been working on them for 12 years, I think. And, we've built a very elaborate curriculum through fundamental knowledge and close trial and error. And it's a massive cooperative system, and it's growing and thriving.
If you are in despair about your child's school or what you're going to do, then go to hillsdale.edu and find the Hillsdale Schools Project, the Charter Schools Project. It's run by Dr. Kathleen O'Toole, and you can look it up and you can participate in it. As I said, my friends up in Alaska are starting one, and they love it. Thank you, Dr. Arnn.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. For more information about Hillsdale College, head to hillsdale.edu.